Welcome to the Keen on Yoga podcast, bringing you the stories of many people who in various ways are attempting to walk the path of yoga. Our intention is to inspire your own practice and commitment to yoga beyond the mat and in all areas of life. We consider this an offering, a service to the community and labour of love. If you feel inclined, any donations are appreciated. Just visit our page and click the donate button at www.keenonyoga.co.uk/podcast. I hope you enjoy the show. Today's guest on the Keen on Yoga podcast is Eddie Stern. Today's guest on the Keen on Yoga podcast is Rupert Spira. Another one of our segues outside Ashtanga yoga in its literal sense. As far as I know, he's never taught or practiced yoga. He worked as a potter for over 40 years whilst pursuing his love of Advaita Vedanta. Now, Advaita means non-dual, and these teachings generally take place in conversational form, regarding the ultimate nature of our consciousness as one, in a basic sense. So it's from this position that Rupert has lived for many years, and having gradually arrived there through the practice and help of his primary teacher, Francis Lucille. For the last 12 years, Rupert, born and bred in the United Kingdom, has taught internationally and to great acclaim, because he breaks these rather conceptual sometimes teachings down into a more practical sense. He starts from the premise, as you'll hear on this podcast, of everyone wants happiness. And he generally illustrates from there that we limit ourselves unhappily through believing our experience to be out there, in the world, as opposed to already possessed in us. So to put it most simply, Rupert teaches that happiness is our essential nature. And yet this is no New Age talk. His success as a teacher, in my eyes, and I consider him a teacher of mine, comes through his propensity to deliver incredibly clear and concise instruction. So although I challenged Rupert in the conversation, it was for the purpose of explaining and him further clarifying his teachings. And I hope you're able to catch and enjoy the deep resonance of his words, and indeed the energy in this highly unique talk of ours. So today's guest is Rupert Spira. Welcome, Rupert, to the Keen on Yoga podcast.
Thank you, Adam. Nice to be with you.
Yeah, it's really, I'm so honoured and flattered to have really someone who I've looked to for many years. So today, bear with us. It's not about Ashtanga yoga, audience. This is about Advaita Vedanta. And to that end, I wonder if, Rupert, you could give a little bit of your backstory, as in how you arrived at where you have today.
When I was in my mid-teens, I became very interested in spiritual matters. And in fact, I think the very first book I ever read was a book of poems by Rumi, who many of you will have heard of. In those days, the translations that we're now familiar with by Coleman Barks and others were not available. I only had the rather dry academic translations, but they were very beautiful, and they touched me very much. So this kind of awakened my interest. Well, let me go back even further. Let me go right back to the beginning. When I was 7 years old, apparently I said to my mother, "I feel that everything is God's dream, and that our job is to make the dream as pleasant a dream as possible." It was one of those naive, innocent, unsolicited comments that a very young child.
Nevertheless, she must have been surprised, nevertheless.
she was surprised and remembered it and has reminded me of it on several occasions. So now fast forward 10 or so years, I came in contact with Rumi's poetry, which resonated very deeply with me, that this original sentiment that I felt that everything is God's dream, everything is an expression of God's being, was still present in me. It had been present all through my childhood and early teenage years. So reading Rumi kind of reawakened that feeling and that interest. I then learned to meditate. I started going to a society in London called the Study Society, which was a society which was devoted to studying the classical Advaita teaching, the non-dual teaching, as expressed in India. So I learned to meditate in this school and spent 20 years there studying the non-dual teaching. So now this takes you to about my mid-30s. I felt that I had sorry, did you want to?
No, I was just going to qualify where that school was and what it was called again.
It was called Colet House. It was called the place is called the Study Society.
Right.
I think it's soon to be changed its name. The Study Society. It's Colet House in West London. I think they now call themselves the Centre for Non-Duality. So I really grew up in
right.
this.
Okay, so you've been doing this all your life.
So since all my adult life, I've been meditating, going to studying the classical Advaita or non-dual teaching. I did this for 20 years, and at some stage, I felt that I'd come to the end of that. I'd reached a limit, not really because of the teaching itself, but because of my own understanding, but possibly because the teaching came from an Indian tradition. I felt that I was not able to really make the understanding my own. So I moved away from that school. I later met the man who became my teacher, Francis Lucille, and spent the next 13 years with him, again, studying and practicing, attending many retreats, asking numerous questions, having many conversations.
Again in London?
Doing yoga. No, this was now, he lived in California, so I used to attend his retreats in all over Europe and California. And it was really during this period that all the teaching that I had learnt about during those first 20 years really became my own lived and felt experience. And that it was towards the end of that time that I wrote a book and began to speak about these matters myself. So that's a very condensed,
I'm sure,
history.
There's a nice synopsis. I mean, 45 years, it flashed by in an instant.
It has indeed.
Yeah, I know the feeling. I'm not even as old as you yet. What work were you doing at this time? Were you working? I mean, what?
Yes, I was working as a potter.
That's right.
I had been all through my school years and early teenage years. I was interested in science, I was fascinated by biology, biochemistry. I was intending to go into a career in medicine or biochemistry. But then in my mid-teens, I saw an exhibition of the work of a man called Michael Cardew, who was one of the founding fathers of the British studio pottery movement. Anyway, my kind of fledgling career took an abrupt 90-degree turn, or 180-degree turn, I should say, at that stage. And I went to art school. I did an apprenticeship later with Michael Cardew for the last couple of years of his life. And I worked as a potter for 30 years and had a studio, first of all, in Hampshire, where I lived, and then in Shropshire, and exhibited all over the world.
Yeah, it sounds like
and
that.
So in my in my late 30s, 40s, really for 30 years, from really up until about the age of 50, when, as I said, I wrote this book, I started to receive invitations to speak about non-duality. So I began to travel, holding retreats. And at some stage, the speaking and writing about non-duality really took off, and there came a time when I just couldn't do both. So one career sort of came quietly to an end, while the other began to take off. So for the last 12 or so years, I've been writing and speaking about these matters.
You don't make any pottery anymore, or just for yourself?
I don't even have a studio anymore.
Oh,
no.
Well, you have to now slightly qualify, or at least give the audience some idea of what you're meaning when you say non-duality or Advaita.
Okay. Non-duality is simply the understanding that reality consists of a single, unlimited, and indivisible whole, whose nature is consciousness or awareness, or in traditional religious language, spirit, or we could even say love. But normally, we would say that non-duality is the understanding that reality is essentially consciousness, that consciousness is the ultimate reality of everything, both of ourself and of the universe that we perceive. So the most of us, just to put this in context, most of our experience is not only conceived but felt to take place in subject-object relationship.
Yes.
Self and other, mind and matter, subject and object. So this, the non-dual traditions would suggest, is an illusion. The division of experience into a subject and an object, mind and matter, is an appearance. That's how it appears things are. But in reality, underneath this appearance of subject, object, me and you, this and that, there is a single, infinite and indivisible whole whose nature is consciousness.
It sounds a stupid question, but what attracts you to get into that in the first place? I mean, for a layperson thinking, okay, fair enough, right? I'm just kind of envisaging a certain person in the audience thinking, well, okay, that sounds fair enough. Yeah, everything's one in the end, but I'll just carry on, living my own selfish life and my own selfish desires. And, like what's the benefit of pursuing this path?
I've given you a rather philosophical definition of the term Advaita or non-duality. Let me try and
well, I asked for it, to be fair,
or describe it. Yes, well, that's why I defined it in those terms. Let me try to speak about it in a different way, which will perhaps relate more to our everyday experience rather than a philosophical idea. I would suggest that non-duality is the non-dual understanding is the understanding that underlies all the great religious and spiritual traditions. And if this understanding were to be summarized, it could be summarized in two statements. I've given you the second statement, namely that reality is a single, infinite and indivisible whole. In other words, that we are one. But the first statement, the first way we could distill the essence of the non-dual understanding would be to suggest that peace and happiness are our very nature.
Right. That sounds more attractive.
That sounds a bit more attractive. Not many people like this. If you
oneness, I'll take oneness, but yeah, spiritual, like peace and that sounds more like it. Yeah.
If we were to do a survey on the streets, how many
people want oneness
are interested in the ultimate nature of
truth,
reality?
It's not truth.
Not many, or truth. This doesn't occupy many people. However, if we were to ask how many people are interested in happiness, all 7.8 billion of them.
At least a large percentage of people, hopefully.
Well, I think we can be sure that more than just a large percentage. I think we can say for certainty that everybody, without exception, loves happiness above all else.
Okay, so let's carry on with this discussion.
So now, to answer your question, what got me into this? I'll relate an experience that happened to me. This was in my early 20s now, so I'd been interested in these matters for some time. I was already practicing and meditating, studying, but an experience that most people will be able to relate to occurred to me in my early 20s. Well, not an extraordinary experience at all, a familiar experience. In brief, my girlfriend, who we'd been together for 3 or so years, I was expecting us to get married and live happily ever after, in a phone call lasting for couple of minutes, just terminated our relationship. And that was that really the kind of bottom fell out of my world. Then I realized that I had invested my happiness in something so fragile, so fleeting, so insecure. And this precipitated, this really, it was like a catalyst in my spiritual search at this time. As I said, I had been interested in these matters, but now this gripped me with a passion. And I had this single question: what is a reliable source of happiness? What can I'm going to spend my life seeking happiness. I love happiness above everything else. If I was given one wish, somebody said, "What do you want?" I'd ask for happiness. Why would you ask for anything else? In fact, if you did ask for anything else, it would only be because you thought that you would get happiness from it. Let's say you asked for $1 million. Why do you want $1 million? If somebody said to you, "Okay, I'll give you $1 million, but I guarantee you'll be miserable," would you take it? Of course not.
Well, doesn't this relate to the qualification of happiness? What is it that we mean when we say happiness?
Well, I'm presuming that everybody knows what is meant by the experience of happiness.
Well, I mean, not to play devil's advocate, but a lot of people presume actually it's excitement, not the kind of stillness and peace that is prescribed within the more spiritual. I mean, the materialist happiness would be excitement, stimulation, right? They're not advocating peace out there.
When we're excited, we are in a state of expectation. We're expecting something to happen, which we hope will be something that we enjoy. It's not a state of happiness, it's a state of expectation. In the experience of happiness, expectation has come to an end. Let's say you seek, let's say you're looking forward to your summer holiday, and you're in a state of excitement. You're in a state of expectation. You're looking forward to arriving on the Caribbean beach. Now, when you arrive on the Caribbean beach, you are no longer in a state of expectation. What you were expecting has already come about. You're happy because you've got what you want. In other words, happiness and excitement or expectation are mutually exclusive. If you're expecting something to make you happy, you're not yet happy. So in the experience of happiness, seeking, desire, expectation, excitement come to an end. What you've got is what you want.
What is that?
In other words, we could define happiness in the negative.
I suppose I'm using excitement towards desire. Like when I say excitement, I don't actually mean anticipatory excitement. I mean a sense of desiring something as in sensory stimulation. You're on the Caribbean beach and you're desiring again. You're not there. You're not really happy. You thought you would be. You got your cocktail. You got your phone or whatever's on the phone. You're still in this state of stimulation, assuming that's happiness, but still something's missing.
Yeah, if something's missing emotionally, not physically, but if something is missing emotionally, then you're not happy. You're still expecting something to happen or to acquire or achieve something in order to be happy. So happiness is we experience happiness when a desire is fulfilled. In other words, when desire comes to an end, we experience happiness. That's what happiness is, the end of desire, the end of seeking, the end of resisting.
That's a pretty radical proposition for some people to kind of accept that actually it'd be the end of desire.
Well, when you seek something, do you not seek it? in order to bring the seeking to an end.
Of course.
Yes, it's not a radical proposition at all. It is just a statement of fact. So let me ask you a question, Adam. Is there anything you want in life more than happiness?
Yeah, probably truth.
If you knew that truth would make you miserable, would you still desire it?
I don't know. I mean, it sounds perverse. It sounds perverse, Rupert, but maybe I would.
If you say I don't know to that question, it implies that you're not sure that you want truth above all else. So now go back and consider my original question. What is it that you want for certain above all else? Because you're not sure that it's truth. You want truth on your conditions. As long as truth comes with happiness, you want it. But there's no guarantee that truth will come with happiness. So now go back and ask, you're offered two things, truth or happiness. Which would you prefer?
Oh, that's a tough one. Well, I can't say both. Can't be truthfully happy. I think to be fair, we're playing a kind of game here. But to be fair, I think that happiness and truth are probably you can't find one without the other.
They are. I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
Of course, I agree with you.
Mucking around here.
Hence my statement at the beginning that the first definition of the non-dual understanding is that happiness is the very nature of our being. I was trying to indicate was that we desire happiness above all else.
But actually, the experience of happiness is the cessation of desire rather than the kind of going into the desires. It's still, I mean, I'm not saying you're speaking in a radical terms. To me, this makes sense. But I mean, I think to many people, this is it's quite a profound statement.
Well, yes, that may be so. Seeking is a state of becoming. When we seek something, we don't want what we have now. We want something that is non-existent. We want something that we project into the future. In other words, we are not at peace and fulfilled now. We desire an object, a substance, a person, an activity in the future because we think that person or object will bring our state of dissatisfaction to an end. So, to go back to the non-dual understanding, that the non-dual understanding suggests that the happiness for which I would suggest everybody seeks above all else cannot be found in objective experience. It is the very nature of our own being. And therefore, the direct path to happiness is this exploration of the nature of one's own being. This is why almost all the great religious and spiritual traditions encourage us to go inwards, not inwards into the body, but inwards into the depths of our own being, or into the depths of our own mind. All the great traditions tell us this is where the happiness for which we long resides.
I think, and again, I'm, just kind of imagining, and to a degree, I think it was my thinking when I first encountered this message. It's like, well, that just seems rather stark and kind of bland. Like, okay, I'm left without desire. What do I do now? Like, okay, theoretically, I'm going to be happy, but, to the onlooker who's used to desire, it seems like a rather colourless life. I mean, I'm sure a question you've been asked 100 times is, well, can you still enjoy stuff? Like, do you, as someone who is, I assume, reached this state of desirelessness, can you still, do you still enjoy pleasure? Right? So, you don't desire pleasure, but you can enjoy it.
Yes, your happiness is no longer dependent on pleasure. It doesn't mean to say that you don't enjoy it, but you don't need a pleasant experience in order to make you happy. Your happy is prior to what is or is not taking place in your experience. You say this is rather a bland life. Can you enjoy a life like this? On the contrary, I would say it was the only way to enjoy a life. Can you truly enjoy a life in a constant state of seeking and resistance? Is that an enjoyable life? No, of course not. What we call the ego or the separate self lives in a constant state of dissatisfaction. That is seeking and resistance. That is not enjoyable. The one thing the ego or the apparently separate self seeks is to bring that state of dissatisfaction to an end. Well, the end of dissatisfaction is what is commonly referred to as happiness. On the contrary, you say, is it possible to enjoy such a life? It's the only way to enjoy life. How can one enjoy life if one lives in a constant state of dissatisfaction? That's not enjoyment. That's suffering.
Can you pragmatically say how it's different then that you, in your approach to leading daily action, from this perspective, rather than say, I mean, how would you define the regular perspective out there? Materialism, or I don't know how you'd like to qualify it, but the regular person who's pursuing desire.
The regular, most people's feel that they are a separate self or ego. This is most people's understanding and felt experience of themselves. I am a temporary, finite, separate self, living in the body, limited to the body, destined to share, to age and become sick and to die with the body. This is the common view of ourself as temporary, finite, separate selves. The inevitable consequence of this belief of separation is suffering on the inside and conflict on the outside.
Yeah.
It is in response to the experience of suffering, or suffering on the inside and conflict on the outside, that the non-dual traditions, the non-dual understanding, in whatever tradition it is expressed, says, if you want relief from suffering, you have to recognize the nature of yourself. Happiness cannot be found through objective experience.
In your living experience, I mean, do you step outside in the morning? I mean, I don't suppose probably no one gets milk delivered to their house anymore, right? Or probably doesn't drink it, but, pick up the milk bottles and kind of feel one with everything. Like, is it a consistent experience, or, was there a moment when it changed for you psychologically, experientially?
So, as I said, from a very early age, the age of 7 was the first time I ever formulated it. I had this intuition that everything, that reality was God's dream. And in just the same way that when we have a dream at night, the entire contents of the dream is the activity of our own mind. This intuition, now 50 odd years later, I formulated differently. I suggested the entire universe is not God's dream, although I might say that in a religious context, but is the dream or the activity of infinite consciousness. And I am just one segment I as an individual, I'm just one segment of that infinite consciousness, which is, so to speak, interacting with itself. So that was my very first intuition of it. Then I forgot that intuition. I fell into separation, as we all do. I then had to study and practice for many, many years to recognize not only the nature of myself, but to recognize that the relationship between myself and the universe. And at some point, it became clear to me that what I essentially am and what the universe essentially is the same. Now, it doesn't mean that when I go outside and pick up the milk bottle, I feel one with the milk bottle. No, it's just a general feeling that that I share my being with everyone and everything. In other words, the appearance of multiplicity and diversity has lost its veiling power. It's. I'm not suggesting that the appearance of multiplicity and diversity doesn't, from time to time, come back and veil its reality, but increasingly rarely. Fewer and fewer experiences have the capacity to persuade me that life really consists of separate, independent, discrete people and animals and objects. I'm describing it in philosophical.
Yeah, I was going to say, can you explain that experience in a kind of?
It's more a matter
visceral,
of feeling.
In a visceral way, right? So you feel it. This is a sense of a felt experience in the very body. You feel that in the body.
A felt experience that whatever I experience out there in the universe is of the very same nature as myself. It's a very common experience. It's called love or beauty. That's what the experience of love is. When we love someone, we basically feel that we are one with that person. That's what the experience of love is, the feeling that we share our being. We may have different ideas, but love is the feeling that at the deepest level, we are one. And beauty is exactly the same experience, but in relation to an object rather than a person. So I'm not describing some...
It's nothing far out. What's far out is you're suggesting you feel that all the time. I mean, this is quite an incredible claim, if it's to be believed. You're saying you're feeling in love, like that state of feeling all the time.
It's not a heightened sense of being in love. But it's a feeling that whatever I encounter, that its essential nature or being is what I am. Yes.
Was there a moment when that was it a quick click when you changed that state? Or slow, gradual? Okay.
It wasn't. There were insights, sort of incremental insights along the way, where this conviction got stronger and deeper, and the more the more I felt it, the more I lived in a way that was consistent with this understanding. It confirmed again and again this possibility. It just became, over a period of time, and it continues to deepen, it just became my lived and felt experience. But there was no, as I say, there were glimpses, but there was no decisive moment where it changed from black to white.
Right.
It was more that as I said, the appearance of multiplicity and diversity, the appearance of 10,000 things, gradually lost its capacity to veil the oneness that lies underneath it. It's like when you watch a movie, and when we watch a movie, we're watching a football game. We see 50,000 people in the stand. We don't ever think I'm seeing 50,000 things. We always retain, even if we don't formulate it to ourselves, we always retain the knowledge that we're looking at one screen. In other words, the football match or the movie is transparent. The image in the movie or the match is transparent to its reality, namely the screen. Well, it's the same thing. Looking out at the world, the appearance of 10,000 things becomes increasingly transparent to its reality, namely infinite consciousness, or in religious language, God's infinite being. Doesn't mean to say that we cease, or it doesn't mean to suggest that I'm looking at an extraordinary world that you are not seeing. No, I see exactly the same world as you see. If the Buddha were here sitting next to us, he would be looking at exactly the same world that we are looking at. He'd be seeing the same world, but it would have lost its capacity to persuade him that reality consists of a multiplicity and diversity of discrete, independently existing objects and subjects. But underlying this appearance, there is a single, infinite, indivisible whole, and that is what we essentially are.
How do you do this if you're not a teacher like yourself? I mean, for most people pursuing a career in the world, pursuing a life in the world, it seems hard to operate in this state whilst trying to gain a foothold in material reality, let's say. I mean, is it kind of completely antithetical to materialism?
I would say it was hard to live in any other way. It's hard to live from the egoic point of view. The ego, or the separate self that most people believe and feel themselves to be, is in a constant state of conflict and tension, both within themselves and with everyone else. That's hard. What I'm speaking of is not.
Yeah, I suppose I'm just thinking of the regular person who kind of thinks, well, okay, if I don't push my agenda on the world, if I don't assert my being and, what I want and, to try and achieve financial security in my home and my food, which are big things, right? Like I'll starve in this state of oneness.
No, I'm not suggesting for a minute that any of those goals, financial security, a nice home to live in, food, health, I'm not suggesting for a minute that none of these things are valuable or desirable. Of course they are. I'm suggesting that if we invest our desire for happiness in the objective content of our experience, in other words, if we expect a person to make us happy, or a house to make us happy, or a job to make us happy, or a holiday, or anything or anyone to make us happy, we are destined for disappointment. So rather than spending one's life seeking happiness where it does not live, I'm simply suggesting that one should seek happiness where it truly resides, namely in one's own being. And this is not incompatible with leading earning a decent living, bringing up your family, educating your kids.
If everyone's won, then why would you take money off someone else? They're you. Why would you? How could you ever do business?
Because you may have recognized your true nature of peace and happiness. You may feel yourself one with everyone and everything, and yet at the same time, you may have a child who is sick, and you need to go to the pharmacy to buy some medicine. Your pipes may burst. You need to call a plumber to fix your pipes. You may need a shelf in your kitchen. You call a carpenter to build a kitchen shed or to build a kitchen shelf. All these things. You may need to drive to go to work. You need to buy a car. You need some money to buy your car. So you need to go, etc. There's nothing incompatible with earning a living, paying other people to do things that you are not able to do with money that you have earned by doing things that perhaps they are not able to do. There's nothing incompatible with that. There's nothing incompatible about that, about what I'm saying with getting an education, training, developing skills, finding a job, earning a living.
And you can still I would still say assert a sense of individuality whilst also at the same time as believing one's non-dual. It seems a bit confusing.
Absolutely. One's individuality flourishes on account of this understanding. The individuality is crippled. One's true individuality is crippled by the ego or sense of separation. Once our individuality, once our character is liberated from the sense of separation, we don't just become a bland wallflower. No, our character is liberated from the tyranny of the ego. And our character actually it may become more colorful as a result. In another person, it may become quieter and more retiring. It can vary, but one's individuality doesn't go. It is enhanced, but one's individuality is then used, instead of being used in the service of the ego with its train of suffering and conflict. The individuality is used in the service of truth and love and beauty. And as an individual, you express those qualities in the world. You don't just sit at home meditating all day long. You may go out and travel around the world, but you're not doing so to fill up this void inside yourself, that this insatiable void that needs more and more and more to make itself happy. And even then, it's never really happy. It still needs more and more. No, you feel basically at peace in yourself, but you still may go out into the world.
But why would you? Why would you? You just sit at home staring at the clock.
Is that what you do when you're happy? When you're happy, is that what you do when you feel love or happiness or peace? You just sit at home staring at the clock? No, you don't. Of course you don't. There's this. You go out. You express it. You share it. You celebrate it. So when you have this understanding, whether you formulate it intellectually in these terms, or whether it's just something more at the felt level, there is in almost everybody, perhaps not everybody, that the traditions describe people who have lived as hermits in caves, but in almost everybody there is this irrepressible impulse to share this understanding. And by this understanding, I don't mean this intellectual understanding. I mean to share happiness, peace, love, beauty. So you don't sit around at home staring at the clock. That's what depressed people do. That's what people whose lives are dominated by the ego. Depression is an extreme version of that.
Right.
The people who have recognized or are in the process of recognizing this understanding in themselves, in other words, as the sense of separation becomes more and more transparent in them, their innate peace and joy and love begin to emerge from the depths of their being. And these people tend to go out into the world and share it and communicate it in one way or another. They bring this love and understanding to humanity. And their character is now used in the service of this love and understanding. Such people are often tremendously energetic, powerful people. Not always. They could also be very quiet and retiring and and just live a quiet life at home. That's also possible. In other words, this understanding can inform a wide variety of different characters. Some may become more extrovert as a result of this understanding. Some may become more reclusive and retiring as a result of this understanding. Yeah. So I'm not suggesting there is one way to express this understanding. There are innumerable ways. In fact, the ego is the great leveler in life. The ego makes us conform and become.
But surely, are you not still living through the ego? Perhaps you could say you're not the ego, but isn't it still?
No. The ego is the belief. No, the ego is the belief in separation.
But if you didn't have an ego, how would you feed yourself? How would you take care of your basic needs if you didn't still believe you had a separate self?
I'd go to the fridge. I'd open the fridge. I'd take out my.
So it's still a condition. Is a conditioned reaction, or you?
Misunderstanding. There's a misunderstanding here, Adam. That the ego equals the mind and the body. This is, and therefore, without an ego, how can you possibly function? No, this is a misunderstanding. The ego, the mind, and the body are not by themselves the ego. The ego is a belief and a feeling that what I essentially am is limited to the mind and the body. It is a belief in separation. Now, the ego, the mind and the body can function under the belief in separation exactly the same mind and body can function divested of the belief in separation. In fact, the mind and the body function much better when they are not dominated by the belief in separation. So it is not this understanding that somehow makes us dysfunctional. It is the ego which makes us dysfunctional mentally, emotionally, and physically in extreme cases. This understanding liberates us from that dysfunction, and the mind and our body then is then available to be used in the service of love and understanding, whereas previously it was used in the service of the neuroses and the anxiety and the fear and the dysfunction of the ego. So
how would you... I liked that. I thought, I'm not very good at the pause. I'm just learning how to pause. And I'm very much like your pauses. I was just pausing with you. I enjoy them now. I'm trying to enjoy them. It's not my temperament. So, how would you teach that? I suppose, I know, I have to say, I know a little bit of Advaita style of teaching, and it generally is a discourse, right? A question or a lecture, answers.
Adam, I teach it the way by doing what I'm doing now.
Yes.
Which is basically, I come to this conversation and I have no idea what we're going to talk about. I'm open to whatever you have to say. You ask me a question and I respond. That's it. That's what I do.
That's not an easy teaching role to inhabit. Well, maybe it is for you now, but...
Well, it is easy. It's very easy because it just requires being open and listening and responding sincerely from one's own experience.
Do you ever get angry at the questions? Do people ever wind you up?
No.
I suppose one thing that I was thinking, in talking to you... Yeah.
If I got angry... If people asking questions made me angry or wound me up, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I'm doing what I'm doing because I enjoy it. I love people's questions. I feel their sincerity. Somebody asked me recently, don't you get bored of hearing the same questions over and over again? I don't know how many thousands of questions I've heard. I've never heard the same question once, because every question comes with the sincerity and interest and love of the person who asks it. And I feel it as such. I feel it's like the first question I've ever been asked.
Right.
And so I feel enthusiastic about it. No, it doesn't irritate me at all.
I suppose there's many kind of qualifications of one simple question, like how can I be happy and how can I get out of this sense of separation, I suppose. There's the qualifier of that. Said in many different ways, perhaps.
Okay, so now you ask how can I get out of this sense of separation? You asked two questions then. Let's take the last one. How can I get out of this sense of separation, this sense that I am separate? And I would suggest the answer is you have to begin to explore yourself.
Well, that's nebulous. Okay. How do I do that?
Okay, the next question, how do I do that? Well, would you agree that you always feel that you are yourself? Or, for instance, let's just take today. You feel that I've been myself. I've been Adam all day today.
I'm prepped for this one. I've heard you do this one before. I think there's been many different shades of Adam today.
No, I didn't ask you. Okay, that's perfect. You said many different shades of Adam, but it's always the same Adam, albeit different shades. So let's not talk about the different shades. Let's talk about the Adam who is the consistent element throughout all these shades. Yeah, you said there have been different shades of Adam all day. So you agree that Adam has persisted all day?
In a figure of speech.
No, not a figure of speech, your actual experience. What you've actually said without realizing it is that
I cannot guarantee it. I suppose if I'm philosophically kind of, coming at you here, I would say I cannot guarantee. There's been different experiences, and I cannot put them into a particular location. Philosophically speaking, I could call myself. How can I?
I'm not talking philosophically, Adam. I'm trying to do an experiment with you in your experience. And in response to my first question, you said there have been different shades of Adam all day long. So tell us about the Adam whose different shades is present all day long.
What would you like me to say?
Anything that is true of the Adam that you refer to, whose different shades you experience all day long.
To describe the experience of self.
You said there are different shades of Adam all day long. So I'm using your language.
Yeah.
Ask you to tell us more about Adam, not the different shades of him. We want to know about Adam, the one that has been present all day long.
I suppose I couldn't give a particular word or experience, or I don't know whether yes, I mean, when I reflect back on it, I would say it's very hard to pin down, and that I suppose that's why I'm talking to you, an experience which is consistent, but which doesn't have a particular quality or colour attached to it, which isn't pertaining to the original experience behind it.
That's perfect. That's very good. What you've said is that Adam has no objective qualities that I can define. Adam has been persistent, present all day long. That was your first statement. Adam has been present all day long. But when I try to find what I referred to by Adam or myself, I don't find anything objective there. I can't say anything about it. What you're saying is that I cannot say anything objective about myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, let me ask you another question. If this is, and I'm just reformulating to you what you've said to us. So let me ask another question about yourself now.
I'll go with it.
If you can't find anything objective about yourself, how do you know that you are limited, either in time or space?
Yeah, of course you can't.
How could anything that has no limits lack something?
Yeah, I'm with you there.
What is the common name for the absence of lack?
Satisfaction.
Or happiness, exactly. There you are. In 4 simple steps, you've gone to the happiness that is your essential nature.
But why isn't I don't still feel it now, then? I think it in the head, but it's not in the body. It's not an experience in the body.
No, you've already said your true nature is not an experience of the body. Sensations, bodily sensations, are pleasant or unpleasant, but happiness has got nothing to do with pleasure.
But surely you must be feeling it somewhere. You're not feeling it anywhere in the body. It's a feeling state in the body. No?
No, it's not in the body.
Right, it's not in the body at all.
It has an effect on the body. The body may relax or laugh or cry as a result of the experience of happiness. But the experience of happiness itself is not a state of the body.
So where is it? Where does it reside?
Where does where does any experience take place? What is the medium within which experience takes place?
It's the physical body?
No, the physical body is an experience.
Okay.
Our only experience of a physical body is either a sensation or a perception. In what do sensations and perceptions take place?
The mind?
In consciousness. All experience takes place in consciousness. Even our experience of space takes place in consciousness. So when you say, where does this experience of happiness take place? I would suggest ultimately it doesn't take place in time and space. Time and space take place in consciousness. Happiness is the experience of consciousness recognizing itself. That is, ourself recognizing ourself. And it doesn't take place in time or space.
Is this view, does God fit into the picture anywhere?
I would suggest that God or the Godhead was the traditional religious term for infinite consciousness.
Right.
The ultimate reality of both ourself and the universe.
So you feel that sense of love and connection, but it's not to a God, it's to just a general experience of reality, energy, the play of consciousness.
I would suggest that the experience of love is the collapse of the subject-object relationship. Subject-object relationship, the me, in the experience me and you are separate. The experience of love is the collapse of that sense of separation. So there's no question of me loving you, because love is the absence or the dissolution of the me and the you, the subject and the object, the sense of separation. So in the experience of love, there is no subject or object. So there's no question of in the ultimate expressions of devotion, that the devotee and the beloved merge as a concession to the separate self on the spiritual path. Many traditions will suggest to that separate self that they devote themselves to or love the teacher or their idea of God or whatever. But this is said as a halfway step to encourage the separate self along a path, which, if it continues to do so, the sense of separation will eventually dissolve. As Rumi said, in the existence of your love, I become non-existent. This non-existence linked to you is better than anything I ever found in existence.
It reminds me of that ending of, have you read anything of St. John of the Cross, when he says, and I die because I don't die?
Yes, he's referring to the death of the sense of being a separate self. He realizes that his being, his self, is not really his self as a person. It doesn't belong to him as a person. His being is is God's being, the only being there is. Now, you had that experience 15 minutes ago when I asked you to describe the Adam that remains consistently present throughout your experience. When I asked you to speak about him, you said, I can't find anything objective there. I then asked you if there were any, if this self that you called Adam had any objective qualities or features or limitations. You said no. That's a negative way of saying my being is infinite. Or as St. John of the Cross said, my being is God's being. You may not formulate it in those terms, but that's what you said. And you said it from your experience, I could tell.
Well, no, just for the record, with our discussion with Rupert, is actually I'm playing devil's advocate, and I've been very, very into what Rupert's saying for years. But if I just agreed with everything he said, then wouldn't be much conversation here. So,
okay, but I'm playing along.
Probably
I know
coming
you
off.
Understand what?
Yeah, I do, and I wanted to come finally to.
I'm playing the game with you.
I know. We're playing a game together. That's life. So I wanted to kind of just finally wrap up. Like most people, I think the death anxiety, the feeling of not being, or the feeling of what's going to happen to me when I die. I think this is it's very, if not consciously aware in one's own experience daily. It's underlying there, and I wondered what you feel now. Kind of like with a death, and how you look metaphysically to the future. I suppose I'm asking, what are your metaphysical views?
My metaphysical views in the context of this conversation, Adam, are that my being, which is not my being as an individual, it is being, infinite aware being, or God's being, is eternal. Why? And by eternal, I don't mean everlasting. I mean ever present. Why do I suggest that? It's because it's my experience. In my experience, what I essentially am is ever present. It's not coming from the past. It's not going towards a future. It's just ever present now. I have never experienced my own disappearance or my own appearance. I'm not talking about me, the person Rupert. I'm speaking about my essential being. Or my being's experience of itself is that it is eternally present and without limits. I haven't come, not I, Rupert, I, this being, has not come from something. It is not going towards something. It is that from which everything else comes, in which everything else exists, and into which everything will sooner or later dissolve. But that being itself is eternal. That which is never ceases to be. That which is not never comes into existence. So this understanding puts an end to the fear of death. And you, of course, the body, your thoughts, your feelings, your activities, your relationships, the body, all these fall away sooner or later. But it leaves our being intact. And actually one who feels this, the aging, as one ages and approaches death, of course, none of us know when death is going to come, but as we live more and more with the possibility of our own physical death, the sense of one's own being, which is the sense of God's infinite being, is magnified. It grows brighter in one. And this is accompanied by a deep peace and joy that bubbles up from the depths of oneself and begins to pervade one's experience.
I'll pause there for a second. I like that. Okay, so finally on a slightly, perhaps more pedestrian level, So I'm a viewer, I'm a listener, and basically more and more we're suffering in this current circumstances with a great deal of anxiety and wanting to do something, right, to get rid of this anxiety and to basically be happier. Is there any take-home practice that one could do without you here to give a good roasting to, as I have attempted?
Yes, to recognize that the awareness with which we know our experience and the awareness in which our experience takes place, and ultimately the awareness out of which all experience is made, is already inherently peaceful. So this, what I'm suggesting, doesn't require a great effort. It doesn't require developing or practicing or becoming a new or extraordinary kind of person. No, it's just a matter of recognizing the nature of one's essential self. When I say essential self, I mean that part of us that is always with us, not our thoughts, feelings, sensations, perceptions, activities, and relationships. These are always coming and going. But that essential being that stays with us, that stays with us throughout the day, throughout the night, throughout our lives, recognizing that one is always and already at peace. It is like the space in the room, never agitated by what takes place in the room. It's like the screen behind the image, never agitated by what takes place in the movie. In other words, its nature is peace and happiness. Simply recognize that and begin to know oneself.
That's the question, isn't it? That is the question. Do you sit in meditation to do that, or do you just go for a walk and think about it? Or
well, to begin with, because the contents of our experience, thoughts, images, feelings, and so on, are so demanding, calling our attention all the time. For most people, in fact, I would suggest in practice for everyone, it is first necessary, yes, to sit in what's called meditation, to turn off your phone, close the door, close your eyes, and initially to turn your attention away from your thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions. We are preoccupied with these most of the day. So to begin with, we turn our attention away from them, not necessarily to get rid of them or change them, just not be involved with them. You could ask yourself a question like, what is it that is aware of my thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions? And this question will take our attention away from the content of our experience, and our attention begins to relax and comes back to our being. And we rest there. We begin to taste the innate peace of awareness. So to begin with, we might do that in formal periods of meditation. We sit down for 20 minutes and we just invite our attention to come back, to sink back into the heart of awareness and rest there. But then in time, there's no reason why this practice, if we can call it a practice, should be confined to formal periods of meditation. Any moment of the day when our attention is not required by our circumstances, we can just pause for a couple of minutes, walking down the street, in between emails, cooking a meal, etc., and ask ourselves, but what is it that is aware of this experience? And in this way, a pause opens up in the stream of our experience, like the cloud cover parting briefly to reveal the ever-present blue sky. So a question such as this, who am I really? What is it that never leaves me? What is it that is aware of my experience? Am I aware? And so on. These kind of questions are like invitations for the constant flow of thinking, feeling, sensing, and perceiving to pause, for a gap to open up in which the background of awareness can briefly shine. And in time, these brief moments cease to be brief moments. Instead of just catching a sight of the sky for brief moments in between the clouds, we the clouds begin to dissipate, or they become more and more transparent, and we remain in touch with the blue sky of awareness in the background of experience all the time. And at some point, we no longer have to go back and forth, either thoughts and feelings or the background of awareness. We can lead a fully engaged, active life of activities and relationships, and yet at the same time maintain contact with the innate peace and quiet joy that is the nature of our self-awareness.
Is there any way, or is there anything that one needs to do in terms of the material aspect of living to enhance or engender this experience? I mean, is it, as we went and talked about a little bit at the start, is it synchronistic to, is it, kind of correlative to capitalism, or do we need to change the way we live in the world, or is there anything that needs to be shifted in a more pragmatic sense? Yeah.
It's rather the other way around. The way we live in the world now, individually and collectively, is a result of our understanding of ourself. So to change the way we live in the world without changing our understanding of ourself is a superficial change at best. We want to change the way we live in the world, either individually or collectively. We first have to change ourselves, and then the change naturally, just as our current way of living, individually and collectively, is an expression of our understanding of ourselves. So as our understanding of ourselves changes, so our way of living in the world will change in correspondence with it. Basically, the way we live in the world now collectively is an expression of the ego, the sense of separation, hence the dysfunction that we see not only in individuals but collectively. If the dysfunction of the ego dissipates, and as a result of our felt of our understanding and our felt experience of ourself, we are in touch with the peace of our true nature and the felt sense of oneness with others, then this will begin to express itself in the way we live individually and collectively in the world. In other words, the paradigm will change. The world paradigm is always an expression of our understanding of ourselves. This is why the words "know thyself" are carved above the entrance to the temple of Apollo in Delphi. These words stand at the very origin of Western civilization. And in the East, this was understood well before that, at least 1,000 years before that. This primary understanding that civilization, true civilization, is founded upon self-knowledge. True self-knowledge lies at the very heart of civilization. And that is why all the great religious and spiritual traditions emphasize this exploration of the nature of ourself, or the nature of our own minds. It is the foundation upon which all other knowledge is based, and therefore it must be the foundation of any truly civilized society.
Well, I don't really know how to wrap it up from there, but we've spoken for an hour, and I always keep it to an hour. So, any parting words, Rupert? I think you've probably said enough.
I think that's probably where my parting words. Yes,
I'd go with that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Adam. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
And thank you for coming on.